Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Please be seated. There's a story that was told about Mother Teresa, about one of the women that she had taken in. One day she came upon a woman in the streets who had been covered with many sores and was infested with all kinds of bugs. Moved to compassion, Mother Teresa took her into the house where she was living, cleansed all of her sores, and dressed them, all the while as the woman screamed in pain, shrieking in agony, and even showering her with curse words. Finally, when Mother Teresa had finished, the woman asked her, she said, "Sister, why do you do this? Not everyone behaves like you. Who taught you?" And Mother Teresa replied, "My God taught." To which the woman replied, "I want to know this God as well." Mother Teresa, it was reported, bent down and kissed her gently on the forehead and said, "You do know my God. My God is love." In her life, Mother Teresa, many times over, had exemplified exactly what St. John had written about in the epistle today. And that is that everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. Now, God, His character is love. And His two primary commandments that He gives us is to first of all love Him with our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then secondly, to love our neighbor as ourselves. Doesn't it follow that perhaps the greatest sin that any one of us could ever commit is that our failure to love? We go to today's gospel. Jesus tells a story about a man named Lazarus. And in so many ways, the story between Lazarus and this woman mirror one another in the beginning. And that is, of course, the woman is out on the streets, living on the streets, living day to day, hand to mouth. And of course, just like Lazarus, she's covered with sores. And then it's also reported that she was infested with some type of insect. But the story that Jesus tells of Lazarus doesn't end in the same way as Mother Teresa's story. Jesus reports that Lazarus lay at the gate of a rich man who had every resource to be able to help him, at least in some way to alleviate some of his suffering. Jesus, he tells us of Lazarus. He describes Lazarus as being a poor, crippled beggar, a man of bad health, a man covered in painful sores, a man filled with extreme hunger. And so day by day, he laid at the rich man's gate, hoping just for even a scrap of food to be handed to him at the rich man's table. And then by contrast, Jesus describes this rich man as having lived a lavish lifestyle, a lifestyle in which he wore fine clothing, apparently had the best of foods at his disposal, and yet there's a hungry man laying outside his door, and the rich man is completely insensitive to the man's needs. I often think about the instances in life when there's somebody out on the roadway begging for money, and in this day and age, it's always kind of hard to discern whether you're being hassled or hustled or what have you. And it's always been a great moral conflict within myself what to do. A lot of times, like so many people, you just hope that the traffic light changes very quickly so that you get through without having to deal with this person. When I read this story, it convicts me. It tells me about the things in my own life that I have to change. The days that, for some reason or another, I end up going and doing the deposit for the church. The shopping center where I go to do that deposit has only one entrance in and out. And there sits a guy with a little board every day, out of work, please help. So I've gotten in the habit of every time I pass by there to give him a $5 out of my pocket, and I sit and talk with him until another car honks at me. And just this one little way that I've let Christ convict me of my own sin, point out my own failure of love. And I thought to myself, if this man is really hustling me, then so be it. That's on his conscience, between him and God to work out. But at least I've done something then to attend to this person's need, or at least what I have perceived to be his need. And maybe it's not much, but it's something. What we see day to day, there's this cold indifference in this world, and it's not just the beggars that are out on the street, but there's this cold indifference in life, really, to the needs that are out there. And this is what has gotten the rich man into trouble. That it's this cold indifference that he has to the needs of others that's placed him eternally outside of God's love. It's placed him eternally outside of God's grace, eternally outside of heaven's gate. So thus, while his reward was to be tormented forever in the fires of hell, hungering for a salvation that he could no longer obtain because he failed to take heed of the call to love in this life, he suffered eternally. But by contrast, Lazarus, who had no other resource but the love and the trust in God's mercy and goodness, then in the end has this reward in heaven with God. I know a lot of people would probably say that that's really kind of cold of God to do that. But really, should the rich man have expected anything different? If the two great commandments are to love God above all else and to love your brother as yourself, and we fail to do that, should any of us expect any different? After all, St. John writes, of course his writing is based on what Jesus had taught, that if a man loveth not his brother whom he has not seen, or love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he hath not seen? The whole point then is that it's through our loving our brothers and sisters that we can, in a very concrete and real way, show our love for the God who made us. To neglect then the fundamental duty to love our brothers and sisters, as we had mentioned, it cuts us off from God's life-giving spirit. It places us then in opposition to his will for how we should be living our lives day to day. As we think about it, in the end, the rich man, he lost heaven. It wasn't because of his wealth. It wasn't because of his possessions. But he withheld his love from God. He withheld it by withholding it from his brother. Again, as John reminds us, he that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. Despite the length of John's epistle today, even the length of the story that we just heard Jesus tell, the point of today's lesson is they're really trying to get across to us is that loving our brothers and our sisters regardless of their situation, treating them with the same love and respect, the same dignity that we would like to receive ourselves, is our primary obligation as God's people. Thus John writes, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God." So it's only in our loving our brothers and sisters that we can really come to know God. And it's only in loving our brothers and sisters that in a real concrete way we can really show our love for God. We can come to church, say our prayers, take the sacraments, and if we don't have that connection to real life, then it does us no good. This love, of course, in the world today, we all know, love is confused. Many words, or I should say love is thrown around in many ways. Of course, you hear a lot of times people talking about love, and it's the romantic kind of love. It's the love that takes you just a very short distance down the road with that person before you realize that, oh, this is real life, and I really need to learn either love this person as God has called me to love this person, or I'm doomed. So love then, the love that God calls us to, it's a conscious act. It's a purposeful act of our will. It doesn't really depend on how I feel today. I really don't feel like doing that. It says, do it. And out of obedience, I do it. The whole thing is that the care that we show to our brothers and sisters, whatever we do to our brothers and sisters, and Jesus said, you do to me. That is, whatever we do is reflective of God's love for us, God's love that He's shown us through His Son, Jesus Christ. And of course, what do we know of that love? John again writes in his Gospel, God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. So, Christ's sacrifice, of course, is for our salvation, but it's also to give us an example to live by. And it's not that we necessarily find ourselves in situations where we're putting our lives on the line each and every day. But we're called to make little sacrificial acts. In some ways to mirror the life and activity of our Savior when He was here on this earth. So the call then for us to love, it's a call then to provide for the needs of our brothers and sisters in any possible way that can benefit them in their spirit and in their body. And it's to love them and provide for them in a way that perhaps they can't provide for themselves. Of course, you know, a person can do for themselves, they ought to do for themselves. But it's in those areas where they have need that we're called to answer. And we're called to answer even if we can't necessarily give completely of our financial or material resources, we can still at least give them our ear. We can at least preach the gospel, share the gospel, perhaps give them a helping hand, perhaps point them in the right direction towards the resources they need, perhaps a financial gift, or in some cases even, as I get sometimes from my wife, an admonishment. You know, it's when I get it, it's well deserved. But the whole point is that we're called to love, and however we respond is reflective then of whether we really truly love God in our lives or not. The late American businessman and founder of the Hilton Hotel chain, Conrad Hilton, had once said that charity is the supreme virtue and the great channel through which the mercy of God is passed on to mankind. So again, our learning to love, showing charity towards others, it's so important to Jesus because it truly is that conduit through which God's love flows into our lives and into the lives of other people. And again, when we withhold that love from our brothers and sisters, then we block them from receiving through us the love God had intended. So in today's gospel, we hear Abraham tell the rich man that there's a great gulf fixed. Of course, this gulf is the gulf between heaven and hell. It's the gulf between us and God that we create when we fail to love. And here's the thing. John reminds us today that we are able to love, and the only reason why we're able to love in the first place is because God has loved us first. It's God then, through his example, through his Son, that has really taught us in the most truest way how to love. And then in the most truest way, taught us what love in its highest form looks like. And then it is God himself who set love in motion in the world and then in our hearts. And then it's God himself that speaks in our hearts and reminds us that perhaps that person we see on the street, or that person we see across the hall who's crying, or just looks lonely, perhaps they really do need even just a few moments of our love. So when we act out of love, out of the love which God has given to each of us, we know that he's at work within each and every one of us. And when he's at work within our hearts, minds, and our souls, and we know that heaven is very near to us. But when we, like the rich man, consistently fail to love, it's not God but us that creates that gulf, that great gulf fixed that Abraham speaks of, that infinite eternal distance between us and God, that unbridged distance that we can never cross from hell into heaven once we leave this life. This lesson today really comes on the heels of Trinity Sunday, in which we talked about our whole life being in the lived out in the life of the Trinity. So as we enter into the Trinity season itself, each week examines a different way in how that life can be lived out, and how that life should be lived out. But of course, we start with the most fundamental thing, of course, and that is to love. And that's the recurring theme that we'll come back to over and over again as we go through the Trinity season. It's this theme that God is love, that he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. And the other part of that is that he that loveth not knoweth not God. So in the final analysis, it's to live in God's love or not to live in it. That's our choice. Eternal happiness or everlasting unhappiness is our choice. Heaven or hell is our alternate choice. And that's the truth that we're presented with today. It's the truth we're presented with every day. And if we ignore it, we do so to our own peril. Amen. Remember the words of our Lord Jesus, how he said it is more blessed to give than to receive.